Today we're going to be talking about the nitrogen cycle. Now, the nitrogen cycle is actually not very difficult, but it does require us to get some new vocabulary. All right. So first, we're going to have to start off with some clouds. We got some clouds over here. And we're going to draw, here's our land. But most of actually what's going to happen in the nitrogen cycle is going to be happening in the soil. All right. So we need to have, this is going to be our soil underneath the grass. Okay. Now, we just have floating around in our atmosphere, we have just nitrogen gas, N2. And it is just in our atmosphere. All right. It's unusable. Plants and animals cannot use just nitrogen gas. So the first thing that we have to do is something called nitrogen fixation. So I'm going to draw nitrogen fixation. I don't know why that moved, but let me put it back. All right. So one way, this is really kind of a cool way. One way that we fix nitrogen is with lightning. Okay. So lightning can take atmospheric oxygen and turn it into a usable form because lightning is a whole big bunch of energy. And it takes these two, so this nitrogen is basically just two ends bonded together. So what happens when the lightning hits it, so when we have these two ends, the lightning comes and breaks these bonds in half. So now we just have these two ends floating about, right? Well, nitrogen does not want to be unbonded. It loves to be bonded. So another thing we just have floating around in our atmosphere is oxygen. We got a lot of oxygen just floating about. So these, we got a lot of oxygen and we got a lot of hydrogen. All right. And so these are going to want to bond together. All right. So we can do a couple of things here. We can either bond it with a couple of H's and we can have NH2 or NH3 or 3. Or we can have NO, nitrogen oxide. But either way, this is going to end up going into the soil because now we've created a usable form. Okay, so this is going to go in the soil. So I'm going to have to scoot this up just a little bit because we got a lot, like I said, going on in the soil. So I'm just going to scoot it up a little bit. All right, in our soil, we have some creepy crawly bacteria. All right, these are just going to be our bacteria. And these are called nitrogen fixing bacteria. All right, so let's talk about what is a nitrogen fixing. This is essentially where we are going to take the nitrogen that is put into the soil, and we'll discover that there's actually other ways in which we can put nitrogen into the soil, but we're going to take whatever nitrogen gets put in the soil. So if it's nitrogen, NH2 or nitrogen oxide, however it gets in the soil, we're going to take this nitrogen and we're going to convert it into ammonia. All right, so I'm just going to write a definition of nitrogen fixing. This is where we convert nitrogen. I'm just going to put big N. How about that? Convert nitrogen to ammonia. and ammonia is NH3. That's an H. Or we can also convert it to ammonium, not to be too confusing, or NH4, which is ammonium, but I don't care that you know the difference. All right, so these nitrogen fixing bacteria are going to convert the nitrogen to NH3, which we just learned is ammonia. Then we have another type of bacteria. So here we're going to have these different bacteria. These are called nitrifying bacteria. These nitrifying bacteria are going to take that ammonia and basically put it into the soil in a form that plants can use. So nitrifying, my goodness, my spelling is terrible today. Is converting ammonia to usable form, which typically is NO3 or NO2, either way. All right. So now we have converted it to NO3. Now this is where we got to scroll up just a little bit. This is where our plants finally come into play. Our plants are going to be here. Let me get some green. We're going to have it. Let's just use a tree. So here's our tree. And remember, trees have roots. So this NO3 is a form that plants can assimilate in their roots. So assimilation happens in the tree root. So plants take it in, and then that's how nitrogen actually gets in the food chain, because we know that it's hanging out in the atmosphere, but we've got to get it in the food chain. Okay, so I'm going to go down here. Assimilation. Plants take nitrogen in using roots. Okay, so that's assimilation. And then there is going to be some extra of this NO3, and NO3 is nitrate, just in case you were curious. I'm not a chemistry teacher, so this is not chemistry class. I'm not going to make you know it, but nitrate. So the other thing is we then can either assimilate from here and go into all the soil and the plants and such, or we can go to another set of crazy bacteria called denitrification bacteria. So here we have these little guys, denitrification bacteria. And these guys are actually going to take this nitrate and turn it back into atmospheric nitrogen. So let's go over here. nitrification. This is going to be convert the NO3 or the nitrate into nitrogen, which is atmospheric nitrogen. Atmospheric nitrogen. All right. So now we went all the way through here, this denitrification bacteria, and now we've put this N2 back into the environment. Okay. Now, the other way we can get nitrogen in the soil is, y'all always love all my animal drawings. So here's an animal. And then our plants, these guys die. These guys die. And we have a special bacteria as well. You know, we have our decomposers. What a mess. Let me try again. Decomposers, which we learned about in our food chain, that are going to break down these animals and their waste into ammonia, and then that ammonia is going to get turned into, is going to be sent to these nitrifying bacteria. So we're going to take this ammonia and turn it into give it to the nitrifying bacteria. All right. So decomposers, plants and animals are going to die. Decomposers are going to break them down, send the ammonia to the nitrifying bacteria, which is going to then put it into the cycle. All right. So we have assimilation then will occur, and it will go back into sort of the food chain. All right. So I'm going to give you a second. That was a lot of definitions. So I'm going to kind of put everything up here for you to see for just a second, and then we'll move on, of course, to the terrible human impact. All right, now the human impact, there's only two big ones, but they are really big. So I'm just going to add them to this drawing right here. The first one is, again, agriculture. Agriculture is going to use nitrogen as fertilizer. And the nitrogen as fertilizer is going to end up in our water and in our soil. And when it goes into the water, it creates eutrophication. So number one, agriculture. The nitrogen in fertilizer runs into water and creates eutrophication. Now, what is eutrophication? Basically, what happens is all this fertilizer has tons of nitrogen in it. It gets flooded into the rivers, in the oceans, and the lakes. It gets all run off into there. And so you have a ton of nitrogen. Well, guess what? Animals don't really use nitrogen. They get their nitrogen from plants. The plants love nitrogen. So plants and algae and fungus, they love nitrogen. So they overgrow in these lakes. And what will happen is you'll have a whole lake. So if this is the lake, I'm going to just use a lake as an example, but it can happen anywhere. So here's my lake. All right. This is this is the lake. All right. And then what happens is all the photosynthetic organisms, all of the plants and plankton and algae, they love all the nitrogen and they grow and they grow. Now imagine that the sun is over here. So they just grow, man. They just grow and grow and grow. And they basically cover up the entire top part of the lake. Okay. So you have plants overgrow the lake. Plants, algae, etc. overgrow the lake. And essentially the plants overgrow the lake that they start using all the nitrogen, all the oxygen, everything in the lake, and it chokes out all of the animals. So essentially it ends up in the end killing all the animals. So you have a green lake essentially covered up with photosynthetic organisms, a green lake, and then nothing underneath. All the animals are going to die because they can't get any nutrients. Those photosynthetic organisms are taking all of the nutrients. Okay? Now, so I just put a picture in here so you could see. This is a normal lake, an oligotrophic lake, what we would call like one that has some nutrients but not a ton, lots of sunlight. And this is a eutrophic lake. So you see plants have overgrown, algae have overgrown, and so underneath you're going to find a whole bunch of dead animals. All right? All right, and so I said there was only 2 ways in which human beings mess this up. And the second way is, of course, our factories and our burning of fossil fuels too. All right, burning of fossil fuels. Burning fossil fuels. Now, fossil fuels are going to release a lot of nitrogen into the atmosphere, and too much nitrogen and nitrogen oxide are greenhouse gases. So when we burn fossil fuels, we put greenhouse gases into the environment, which in turn creates global warming and the greenhouse effect. So I got to go down just a little bit here. Number 2 is going to be burning fossil fuels. And that releases nitrogen into the atmosphere. And this let's not say creates, it's not the only problem. It increases global warming. All right, so that is the nitrogen cycle.